The transport pod shuddered as it breached the outer atmosphere of Cathara Prime, and Marcus Chen gripped the safety harness harder than necessary. Outside the viewport, the planet's surface glittered with ice formations that stretched across continents like frozen veins. Beautiful, deadly. The briefing had been clear. Diplomatic escort duty for a human delegation. 2 weeks maximum, minimal interaction with the Catharan royal family. Simple. Marcus had done 17 of these assignments. This should have been number 18. The landing platform materialized through swirling snow, a geometric marvel of crystalline architecture that seemed to grow from the ice itself. As the pod settled, Marcus ran through the checklist. Ceremonial sidearm secured, translator implant active, diplomatic credentials verified. His breath fogged in the cabin despite the heating systems running at maximum capacity. The external temperature reading made him wince, -43°C. The Kethrans evolved here, thrived in it. Humans needed environmental suits just to survive 30 minutes exposed. The delegation consisted of Ambassador Reeves, 2 junior diplomats whose names Marcus had already forgotten, and himself. His job was simple: stand at attention, look professional, intervene only if things went catastrophically wrong. In 17 assignments, things had never gone catastrophically wrong. The airlock hissed open and cold slammed into the cabin like a physical force. Marcus stepped onto the platform, his boots crunching against frost that reformed instantly wherever he stepped. The Catharan welcoming party waited in perfect formation. 12 guards in ceremonial armor that seemed carved from living ice, their multi-jointed limbs held in positions of formal greeting. Behind them the palace rose like a frozen tsunami, all spires and sharp angles that caught the pale sunlight and threw it back in fragments. Ambassador Reeves moved forward with practiced confidence, speaking the formal greetings in flawless Catharan. The translator implant fed Marcus the meaning: honor, gratitude, hope for mutual prosperity. Standard diplomatic opener. The Catharan guards remained motionless, their compound eyes reflecting the delegation in dozens of fractured images. Then she appeared. The Empress emerged from the palace entrance flanked by 2 attendants, and Marcus felt his military discipline lock into place. She was smaller than the guards, her carapace a pale blue that seemed almost translucent in the cold light. The historical files had called her young for a monarch, barely into her 3rd decade, which translated to roughly 25 human years. What the files hadn't mentioned was the way she moved, each step deliberate, controlled, as though she carried the weight of her entire species with each placement of her 4 legs. The ceremony proceeded according to protocol. Greetings exchanged, gifts presented. Ambassador Reeves handed over a crystalline data tablet containing trade proposals, cultural exchanges, scientific collaborations. The Empress accepted it with a gesture that Marcus's implant translated as gracious acceptance. Everything by the book. Then the wind picked up. It started as a whisper across the landing platform, then built into a howl that made the decorative ice sculptures shake. The Catharan guards shifted slightly, their body language showing what Marcus recognized as concern. The Empress remained still, but something changed in her posture. Her attendants moved closer, and that's when Marcus noticed it. She was shaking, not from fear, from cold. The realization hit him with absurd clarity. The Empress of Cathara Prime, a species evolved for Arctic environments, was freezing. Ambassador Reeves continued speaking, oblivious, reciting prepared remarks about trade routes and cultural understanding. The junior diplomats stood rigid, following protocol. The Catharan guards maintained their positions, bound by whatever ceremonial requirements kept them motionless during formal greetings. Marcus watched the Empress's carapace darken slightly at the edges, a biological response to extreme cold that his briefing materials had covered in passing. Hypothermia. The wind screamed across the platform, and tiny ice crystals formed in the air itself, creating a glittering fog that reduced visibility to a few meters. The Empress swayed, just enough. Marcus's hands moved before his brain fully processed the decision. He unsealed his thermal jacket, the one piece of equipment keeping him alive in this frozen hell, and stepped forward. The translator implant screamed warnings about protocol violations as he broke formation. Ambassador Reeves stopped mid-sentence. The Catharan guard's weapons shifted fractionally toward him. Marcus draped his jacket over the Empress's shoulders. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The wind howled. Ice crystals hung suspended in the air. Every eye, human in Catharan, fixed on him. Then the Empress's attendants moved, reaching for the jacket as though to remove this breach of protocol, this unthinkable violation of diplomatic ceremony. The Empress raised one slender limb, stopping them. She pulled the jacket closer around her carapace, and Marcus saw her shoulders settle as warmth penetrated the thermal reflective material. When she looked at him, her compound eyes caught the light in ways that made his translator implant struggle to assign meaning to her expression. "Name," she said, in perfectly clear English that bypassed the translator entirely. "Marcus Chen, Your Majesty." "Royal Guard Human Diplomatic Corps." The Empress nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then she turned to her attendants and spoke in rapid Catherine that made the translator implant flash with priority tags: medical emergency, immediate intervention, palace chambers. The guards surrounded her instantly, and the entire welcoming party moved as one toward the palace entrance. Ambassador Reeves grabbed Marcus's arm. "What the hell were you thinking?" Marcus watched the Empress disappear into the palace, his jacket still wrapped around her. The cold bit into his skin through his uniform, and he started counting. He had maybe 15 minutes before hypothermia became a serious concern. "She was dying," Marcus said simply. The ambassador's face went pale. "You just touched an alien monarch without permission? You violated first contact protocols. You—" He stopped, looking at the palace entrance where the last Catherine guard had just vanished. "They took her inside. They didn't even finish the ceremony." One of the junior diplomats, a woman named Torres, pulled an emergency thermal blanket from her pack and wrapped it around Marcus. "We need to get him inside, too. Now." They hurried toward the palace entrance, but before they reached it, a single Catherine guard stepped into their path. Taller than the others, with silver tracings across his armor that suggested rank, he looked at Marcus with those multifaceted eyes and spoke in flawless English. "Marcus Chen, the Empress requires your presence. Immediately." Ambassador Reeves started to object, but the guard's posture shifted into something that transcended language. An absolute command. They followed him into the palace, through corridors of ice that pulsed with bioluminescent light, deeper and deeper into the heart of Catharan power. The guard stopped before massive doors carved with scenes of Catharan history. "You will enter alone." "That's not—" Ambassador Reeves began. "Alone," the guard repeated, and there was no room for negotiation in his voice. Marcus stepped forward. The doors opened silently, revealing a chamber that took his breath away. Walls of clear ice showing the frozen landscape beyond, furniture grown from the same crystalline material, and at the center, seated on something between a throne and a medical chair, the Empress. Still wearing his jacket, surrounded by what had to be physicians, their instruments scanning her carapace with beams of colored light, she dismissed them with a wave. They filed out, leaving Marcus and the Empress alone in a room carved from winter itself. "You gave me your protection," she said, still in that perfect English. "In my culture, such an act creates a debt that cannot be easily dissolved." Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him like his missing jacket. "I'm just a guard, Your Majesty. I saw someone in danger." "I reacted!" That is precisely the problem. The physicians returned within minutes, their instruments clicking and humming as they performed scans that Marcus's translator couldn't interpret. One of them spoke rapidly to the Empress in what sounded like medical terminology, gesturing to readouts that floated in holographic displays above their scanning devices. The Empress listened with absolute stillness, and Marcus stood at attention because it was the only thing he knew how to do in a situation spiraling far beyond his training. "Chromosomal instability," the Empress finally said, switching back to English. "A genetic condition that affects approximately 1 in every 50,000 Catharans. My body cannot properly regulate temperature, even in our natural environment." She touched the collar of his jacket. "Your people would call it a fatal flaw. My people call it the frost mark. I was not supposed to survive to adulthood, much less ascend to the throne." Marcus kept his face neutral, military training overriding the shock. The welcoming ceremony was outdoors, in a windstorm. Protocol demanded it. The arrival of the first human delegation to our world required traditional ceremonies conducted in the sacred spaces of our ancestors. Her compound eyes reflected his image dozens of times over. I would have endured it. I have endured worse. But you made a choice that broke protocols on both sides and created something my advisors are currently debating in 17 different chambers. Through the crystalline walls, Marcus could see the palace grounds spreading out in geometric precision. Somewhere in there, Ambassador Reeves was probably having a panic attack. "I apologize if I've created a diplomatic incident, Your Majesty." An apology assumes regret. The Empress stood, and even wrapped in his oversized jacket, she moved with regal precision. "Do you regret your action?" "No, Your Majesty." "Good. She walked to the window, her reflection ghosting across the ice. Because I am about to make your life considerably more complicated. In my culture, when someone saves the life of royalty, particularly through an act of personal sacrifice, a debt bond is formed. It is not symbolic. It is not ceremonial. It is absolute. Marcus felt the room grow colder, though that should have been impossible. What does that mean? It means you cannot leave Cathara Prime until I release you from the debt. She turned, and her expression was unreadable behind the alien geometry of her features. It means your ambassador Reeves is currently being informed that one member of his delegation will be remaining on-world indefinitely. It means that you, Marcus Chen, have become bound to the service of the Catharan Empire by laws older than your species' written history. The implications hit him in waves. My government won't accept that. Your government will accept what they must. We are negotiating for access to Catharan eye synthesis technology, for our advanced medical techniques, for trade routes through our sector that will cut human travel times by 40%. The Empress's voice remained level, but Marcus heard the steel beneath it. They will not sacrifice all of that for one royal guard who violated protocol. She was right. Marcus knew it instantly. It was expendable. The mission wasn't. And if I refuse, you won't. The Empress moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone in winter mornings. Because you are the type of person who gives their coat to a freezing stranger, regardless of rank or species or consequence. You will stay because it is the right thing to do, even as it destroys your life as you knew it. Marcus wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat. She had measured him perfectly. What exactly does this debt bond entail? You will accompany me to all functions, all ceremonies, all gatherings of state. You will learn our customs, our language, our ways of war and peace. You will be my shadow until such time as I determine the debt is fulfilled. How long does that typically take? The Empress returned to her seat, and for the first time Marcus saw something that might have been sympathy in her alien features. The last debt bond lasted 17 years. The one before that, 9. The one before that ended when the bonded individual died in service to the crown, 9 years. Death in service. Marcus felt the weight of his choice settling over him like permafrost. Your Majesty, I have a life. A career. You gave me your coat, the Empress interrupted, and her voice carried the finality of glaciers grinding stone. Everything that follows is consequence. The doors opened, and Ambassador Reeves entered, flanked by 4 Catharan guards. His face was tight with controlled fury. Marcus, we need to talk now. He stays, the Empress said, not even looking at Reeves. Explain the situation to him, Ambassador. I'm certain your superiors have already been briefed on our cultural requirements. Reeves's jaw worked silently for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, professionally dead. Your reassignment has been approved by command. You are hereby detached from the diplomatic corps and assigned to the Catharan royal household under terms of the Frost Treaty. Article 17, subsection 9 requirements for life debt resolution. They already had this written into the treaty? Marcus couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. The Catharans insisted on including provisions for debt bonds. We agreed because the probability of activation was calculated at less than 0.03%. Reeves finally met Marcus's eyes. Congratulations. You beat the odds. The Empress rose, still wearing his jacket like a trophy. I will have chambers prepared for you. My chief advisor will begin your cultural training tomorrow. You are dismissed, Ambassador Reeves. Your delegation will depart on schedule. Reeves gave a rigid bow and left without another word to Marcus. The silence that followed felt like the moment before an avalanche. You're angry, the Empress observed. I'm processing, Marcus corrected. Your Majesty, if I may speak freely? You may. This is insane. You're holding me prisoner because I helped you. I am binding you to service because you demonstrated value beyond measure. The Empress touched the jacket again, and Marcus realized she hadn't removed it despite the warmth of the chamber. Do you know what it means to be marked by the frost, Marcus Chen? It means every day of my life is a battle against my own biology. It means I cannot trust most of my own people to see me as anything other than defective. It means I rule an empire while my body tries to kill me. She moved closer, close enough that Marcus could see the intricate patterns in her carapace, like frost fractals made flesh. And in that moment, on the landing platform, when I was failing in front of my guards, my attendants, my people, and your delegation, you saw only someone who needed help, not an Empress. Not an alien, just someone freezing. That doesn't justify... No, it doesn't. But our laws are our laws, and I will not break them even for you. She gestured, and a side door opened, revealing a Ketharon servant. Maresh will show you to your quarters. You will begin formal instruction in the morning. For now, rest. Adjust. Rage if you must. But understand this, Marcus Chen, you are mine until I say otherwise. Marcus followed Maresh through corridors that blurred together in his shock. His mind kept circling back to the same impossible reality. He'd given away his coat, and somehow that single act of basic decency had just cost him his freedom. The quarters were stunning and alien in equal measure. Walls of translucent ice that showed the stars beyond, furniture that seemed to grow from the floor, a bed of some material that looked like snow but felt warm to the touch. Mirage demonstrated the environmental controls, the waste facilities, the food synthesis system, all in gestures that needed no translation. When he was finally alone, Marcus sat on the bed and stared at his hands. 17 years. Maybe 9. Possibly death in service. All because he'd seen someone freezing and reacted on instinct. His communicator chimed. A message from command, already loaded with official reassignment paperwork, briefing materials on Kethran culture, and a personal note from his commanding officer. You did the right thing. Now survive it. Marcus laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the crystalline chamber. Right thing. As if that mattered. As if good intentions ever protected anyone from consequences. He stood and walked to the window. The palace grounds stretched out below, beautiful and merciless as the empire they represented. Somewhere in there, the Empress was probably already planning his training schedule, his duties, his entire restructured existence. And somewhere back on the landing platform, his jacket was probably being analyzed by xenobiologists as evidence of the moment everything changed. Marcus pressed his hand against the ice window and felt the cold seep through. The same cold that had nearly killed an Empress. The same cold that now defined his future. 17 years, he whispered to the frozen landscape. What the hell have I done? Morning came too quickly, announced by bioluminescent lights embedded in the walls that brightened gradually from dim blue to brilliant white. Marcus had barely slept, his mind churning through implications and escape scenarios, and the growing realization that neither would change his situation. At precisely 600 hours local time, Maresh appeared with what passed for breakfast. A nutrient paste that tasted like frozen berries, and something his translator identified as mineral supplement suitable for human biology. The fact that he was consuming alien protein synthesis on an ice planet light years from Earth while technically imprisoned by an Empress he'd tried to help was just another Tuesday, apparently. Maresh led him through the palace, and Marcus began to understand the scope of where he'd be spending the next however many years. The structure was massive, carved from living ice that seemed to grow and shift subtly when he wasn't looking directly at it. Servants moved through corridors with silent efficiency, their chitinous bodies adapted perfectly to the environment that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. They arrived at a chamber that looked like a combination of classroom and war room. Maps of Cathara and surrounding systems covered one wall in holographic detail. Another displayed what Marcus recognized as family trees, intricate webs of lineage connecting names he couldn't pronounce. At the center sat a Ketharon who radiated authority through sheer stillness. I am Vec Tal, Chief Advisor to Her Majesty the Empress. His English was flawless, each word precisely articulated. You may address me as Advisor Vec. Sit. Marcus sat. The chair adjusted automatically to his human anatomy, which suggested they'd been planning for this possibility more thoroughly than they'd let on. The debt bond is not punishment, Vec began without preamble. This is critical for you to understand. It is an honor in our culture, one that comes with significant responsibility and privilege. You will be trained in our ways, given access to our most protected spaces, trusted with the life of our sovereign. Most Catharans spend lifetimes hoping for such an opportunity. Most Catharans didn't have their lives derailed because they made one impulsive decision, Marcus countered. Vec's compound eyes reflected Marcus in fragments. The Empress could have died on that platform. Her condition makes her vulnerable in ways that would horrify her subjects if fully understood. Your impulsive decision, as you call it, prevented a catastrophe that would have destabilized our entire government. He leaned forward. So yes, your life has been derailed. Accept it, adapt to it, or waste years fighting an unchangeable reality. The bluntness was almost refreshing. Marcus took a breath and forced himself into the mindset that had gotten him through boot camp, combat training, diplomatic certification. Then teach me. What do I need to know? Vec's posture shifted into what might have been approval. First lesson, the Frostmark is classified information. The general population knows the Empress has delicate health, but the specific nature of her condition is protected by royal decree. You will never speak of it to anyone outside her inner circle. Second lesson, formal address requires specific gesture combinations. Failure to perform them correctly in public settings is interpreted as either profound ignorance or deliberate insult. Third lesson, you will learn to read Ketharan body language, because our emotional states are displayed through posture and limb positioning rather than facial expression. Ketharan history, political structure, religious customs, dietary restrictions, ceremonial requirements, military hierarchy, and a dizzying array of cultural nuances that would apparently get him killed or exiled if he violated them. Marcus's translator implant worked overtime, feeding him vocabulary and pronunciation until his skull ached. When Vec finally dismissed him, Marcus's brain felt like it had been packed with frozen information that would take months to thaw into actual understanding. Narration appeared immediately, as though he'd been waiting outside the entire time, and led Marcus to a different section of the palace. These corridors were wider, more heavily guarded, decorated with what Marcus's cultural training now recognized as military honors and ancestral weapons. They stopped before doors that radiated importance, the Empress's private chambers. The doors opened before Maresh could announce them, and the Empress emerged wearing formal robes that caught the light like shattered rainbows. She still wore his jacket underneath, visible at the collar and sleeves. The sight of it created a strange cognitive dissonance. Ancient royal regalia combined with a human thermal jacket that cost maybe 200 credits. "Walk with me," she commanded. They walked. Maresh fell back, giving them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. The Empress led him to a garden area that shouldn't have existed. Impossible plants growing in carefully controlled microenvironments, flowers of crystal and ice that bloomed under specialized lighting, trees that grew downward instead of up, their roots seeking warmth rather than water. "My mother built this," the Empress said, running one delicate limb across a flower that chimed like glass. She also carried the frost mark. She died when I was 12. During a diplomatic mission to our northern territories, the cold took her in her sleep. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. I was never supposed to rule. My older sister was brilliant, healthy, perfect in every way. Then a transport accident took her and my father in the same moment, and suddenly the Empire belonged to a child who couldn't survive her own planet's climate. The Empress touched another flower, this one, releasing a scent like midnight frost. Do you know what my advisor said? That I should abdicate, that I should step aside for a stronger ruler, that the frost mark made me unworthy of the throne. But you didn't step aside. No, I fought. I learned. I proved that strength comes in forms they hadn't considered. She turned to face him fully. And yesterday, on that landing platform, I was proving it again. Enduring the wind, the cold, the pain, because that is what empresses do. We endure. Until your body fails and you die in front of everyone because protocol demanded a ceremony in a windstorm. The Empress's posture shifted into something Marcus's training identified as surprised agreement. Yes. Until that. You saw it clearly in seconds, while my guards stood frozen by duty and my attendants were bound by ceremony. You broke every rule and saved my life, and now we are both bound by consequences. They walked in silence for several minutes, moving between impossible gardens and chambers filled with bioluminescent art. Finally, the Empress spoke again. I need you to understand something, Marcus Chen. This bond is not arbitrary cruelty. If I could release you tomorrow with honor intact on both sides, I would consider it. But our laws exist for reasons that go deeper than individual preference. The debt bond ensures that those who risk everything for royalty are protected, valued, and rewarded. It prevents rulers from discarding those who show them mercy in vulnerable moments. It also prevents those people from having any choice in the matter. It is imperfect, as all laws are. But it is our way, and I will not dishonor my culture or your sacrifice by treating it as negotiable. They returned to the main palace corridors, and Marcus realized guards had been following them at a discreet distance the entire time. His every movement was being monitored, recorded, analyzed. He was simultaneously prisoner and privileged, trusted and trapped. Your training will intensify, the Empress informed him as they reached his quarters. Advisor Vake will work with you daily. My weapons master will teach you our combat forms. My protocol master will drill you in ceremony until you can perform formal greetings in your sleep. You will learn to be Ketharin in all ways but biology. And then you will stand beside me as I rule an empire that still questions my right to exist. You will be visible proof that even aliens recognize my worth. You will be weapon and shield and symbol all at once. She paused at his door. I did not choose this role for you lightly, Marcus. I need someone I can trust absolutely, and you demonstrated that trust before you even knew my name. She left before he could respond, her guards flowing around her like water around ice. Marcus entered his quarters and found his few personal belongings had been delivered. A change of clothes, his datapad loaded with messages from Earth he wasn't ready to read, and a replacement thermal jacket that would never carry the weight of the one he'd given away. He stood at the window and watched the alien stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, the human delegation was preparing to leave without him. Ambassador Reeves would file reports explaining the situation in diplomatic language that made imprisonment sound like an opportunity. Command would reassign his duties to someone else who would never know they were filling the slot of an idiot who couldn't resist helping people. And here on Cathar Prime, Marcus Chen would learn to serve an Empress who wore his coat like armor and treated his sacrifice as the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. He pulled up the first message on his datapad. His sister, angry and confused. They won't tell us anything except you're staying on world for diplomatic reasons. Marcus, what the hell is happening? He started typing a response, then deleted it. How could he explain this? How could he make anyone understand that a simple act of decency had restructured his entire existence? In the end, he wrote, I did what I thought was right. Now I'm living with it. I'm safe. I'm okay. I'll explain when I can. It was inadequate and dishonest in equal measure, but it was all he had. Marcus lay on the bed that felt like snow and warmth combined, staring at a ceiling made of alien ice, and tried to imagine 17 years of this. 9 years? A lifetime. The numbers felt abstract, meaningless, like trying to grasp the distance between stars. Tomorrow he would train, he would learn, he would adapt. Tonight, he let himself grieve for the life that had ended the moment he unsealed his jacket. 3 months passed in a blur of training and cultural immersion that rewrote Marcus's understanding of normal. He learned to read Ketharon emotional states through the angle of their limbs, the spacing of their steps, the subtle color shifts in their carapaces. He learned their martial forms, flowing movements that looked like ice dancing until you realized every gesture could break bones or shatter joints. He learned the 63 formal greetings required for different ranks and occasions, practiced until his hands moved through the combinations in his sleep. Advisor Vec proved to be a brutal but effective teacher, correcting mistakes with cutting observations that somehow never quite crossed into cruelty. You move like a human pretending to be Catharan, he'd say. Stop pretending. Be what you are, while respecting what we are. The difference is everything. The weapons master, HFY, was less verbal and more prone to demonstrating corrections through sudden attacks that left Marcus bruised and educated. You think too slowly, she'd hiss after sweeping his legs for the 5th time in an hour. The Empress's enemies will not wait for your translator to catch up, but the hardest lessons came from the protocol master, an ancient Catharan named Ril Moth, who moved like winter itself and spoke in whispers that somehow carried across vast chambers. You represent Her Majesty in every breath, every gesture, every moment of existence, Ril Moth explained during Marcus's first session. There is no privacy in service to the crown. There is only duty in the appearance of duty, and you must master both. Through it all, Marcus saw the Empress in carefully controlled circumstances. Formal dinners where he stood at attention behind her chair while she negotiated with ministers who clearly resented his presence. Ceremonial functions where he walked 3 steps behind and 2 to the left, his positioning dictated by protocols older than human spaceflight. Strategic meetings where he remained silent and observant, learning the currents of Ketharan politics through what wasn't said as much as what was. She still wore his jacket. Not always, not everywhere, but regularly enough that it became a symbol everyone recognized but no one openly acknowledged. The human's coat, the Empress's armor. The visible reminder that she had nearly died and been saved by an alien who knew nothing of debt bonds or consequence. The palace staff treated Marcus with careful respect that felt like walking on diplomatic ice. Too friendly, and they risked appearing to undermine Catharan supremacy. Too cold, and they insulted someone under the Empress's direct protection. So they navigated a middle path of professional courtesy that left Marcus feeling perpetually isolated. His only real connection was with Maresh, the servant who had somehow become his guide through the palace's social complexities. Maresh didn't speak English, and Marcus's Ketharon remained basic, but they developed a system of gestures and simple phrases that functioned as genuine communication. "You are sad," Maresh observed one evening as he delivered Marcus's dinner. The words were in Ketharan, and Marcus understood them without translation now. "I am adjusting," Marcus replied, carefully forming the clicks and hisses that comprised proper pronunciation. Maresh's limbs shifted into what Marcus now recognized as gentle disagreement. "You are grieving. I have seen grief. It looks like you." The observation hit harder than any of Shekvar's training attacks. "I had a different life before this. All lives are different before transformation. That is the nature of transformation." Maresh set down the meal tray with practiced precision. "The Empress also grieves, though she would deny it if asked." Marcus looked up sharply. "Grieves what?" "The person she might have been without the frostmark. The freedom to make choices without Empire watching. The simple joy of feeling warm without consequence." Maresh's compound eyes reflected the room's bioluminescence. "You are not alone in your cage, Marcus Chen. You simply see the bars more clearly than she does." After Maresh left, Marcus picked at his meal, a human-compatible synthesis that approximated Earth foods while containing nutrients his biology required, and thought about cages. The palace was vast, offering thousands of rooms and corridors to explore, yet he couldn't leave the grounds without permission and escort. The Empress ruled an empire spanning 3 systems, yet she couldn't stand in a windstorm without risking death. They were both prisoners of circumstance. The difference was that she'd been born into her cage, while he'd walked into his voluntarily. His datapad chimed with an incoming message marked priority. Marcus opened it to find orders from the Empress herself. "Attend me in the observation gallery at 20th hour. Formal dress. Come alone." The observation gallery was in the palace's highest spire, a chamber of pure, transparent ice that offered 360-degree views of the frozen landscape. Marcus arrived exactly on time, wearing the formal attire that had been provided for him, deep blue fabric that somehow managed to be both Earth-style and Catharan appropriate, with silver threading that caught light the way ice crystals did. The Empress waited at the center of the chamber, wearing robes that seemed woven from starlight and standing before a display that showed shipping routes, trade negotiations, and diplomatic correspondence, scrolling in holographic complexity. She dismissed the display with a gesture when Marcus entered. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" she asked without preamble. "The anniversary of first contact between humanity and the Ketharan Empire," Marcus replied. He'd been drilled on the date repeatedly. "Yes," which means formal celebrations, visiting dignitaries from 6 different species, ceremonial displays, and approximately 14 hours of events that will strain my endurance to its absolute limit. She turned to face him, and even through alien features Marcus saw exhaustion. "And you will be beside me for all of it, visible to everyone, a symbol of the bond between our peoples that exists because you gave me your coat." "Your Majesty. I spend every waking moment being Your Majesty or Empress or Sovereign of the Northern Ice. When I am with you, I would prefer to simply be Kelvara." The request felt like stepping onto ice of unknown thickness. "That seems inappropriate." "Inappropriate is binding someone to lifelong service because they helped you." "We passed appropriate 3 months ago." She moved to the window, her reflection ghosting across the ice. "Tomorrow you will see the Empire at its most magnificent and most merciless. Delegates will question your presence. Some will consider you a trophy, others an insult. You will hear whispers about the Empress who needs a human to protect her, who wears an alien's coat like she earned it through weakness rather than necessity." Marcus joined her at the window, maintaining the precisely calculated distance that protocol demanded even in private moments.
"What would you have me do?"
"Survive it. Stand tall. Show them that strength comes in unexpected forms." Kelvara's posture shifted into something vulnerable, quickly suppressed, and help me survive it as well. "The frostmark worsens under stress. Tomorrow will be my body's most aggressive attempt to kill me since the landing platform. I will need to know that someone is watching who actually cares whether I live or die, not because of politics or duty or law, but because they saw me freezing and reacted without thinking." She finally looked at him directly. "Can you be that person tomorrow, Marcus Chen? Can you look past the debt bond and the enforced service and the imprisoned life, and just help me survive one more day?" In that moment, Marcus understood something fundamental that 3 months of training hadn't taught him. Calvera wasn't just an Empress or an alien or the person who had restructured his existence. She was someone fighting a war against her own biology every single day, and she was asking, not ordering, asking for an ally in that fight. "I can do that," Marcus said quietly. Calvera. Her name felt strange in his mouth, intimate in ways that violated every protocol he'd learned. But she'd asked for it, and he discovered he couldn't refuse. "Thank you." She turned back to the view, and they stood in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. After several minutes, she spoke again. "Do you hate me for keeping you here?" Marcus considered lying, considered diplomatic deflection, considered all the safe answers. "Sometimes. Not always. Less than I did at first." Hate would at least be honest. Calvara's limbs shifted through positions Marcus had learned to read. Resignation, determination, bitter acceptance. "I cannot release you. Even if I wanted to, the debt bond is witnessed and recorded and culturally absolute. But I can tell you this. When the day comes that the debt is fulfilled, I will not extend it one moment beyond what honor demands. You will have your freedom again, Marcus. I swear it on the frost that marks me. How will I know when the debt is fulfilled? You won't. Neither will I. The bond dissolves when the universe determines balance has been achieved." She laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. "It's infuriatingly vague, I know, but that's the nature of debt bonds. They end when they end, and not before." Marcus absorbed this information and added it to the growing catalog of impossible things he was learning to live with. "Then I guess we're both stuck guessing." "Yes. Welcome to my existence." "Everything important is uncertain. Every day is a battle, and the only constant is ice." They stood together in the observation gallery as the planet turned beneath them. Two people from different species, bound by laws neither had chosen, but both had to endure. Tomorrow would bring ceremonies and challenges and whispers and stress. Tonight they had this moment of shared understanding in a chamber carved from frozen starlight. "I still have your coat," Calvera said eventually. "I've worn it so often that my attendants have stopped commenting. It's become just another piece of royal regalia. Keep it as long as you need it." "Even if that's 17 years? Marcus smiled despite everything. "Even then. Though I might want it back eventually." "If we both survive that long," Calvera replied, and Marcus couldn't tell if she was joking. They descended from the observation gallery together, returning to their separate chambers to prepare for the ordeal ahead. Marcus lay awake for hours, thinking about debt bonds and frozen empresses, and the fact that he'd somehow agreed to help her survive, not out of duty, but something closer to friendship, which was absolutely the last thing he'd expected when he'd given away his coat. The anniversary celebration began before dawn with ceremonial bells that resonated through the palace's ice structure like frozen thunder. Marcus dressed in formal attire under Narration's watchful guidance, each piece of clothing carrying symbolic meaning he'd been required to memorize. The silver threading represented the bond between species, the deep blue symbolized human origins in Earth's oceans, the crystalline fasteners acknowledged Ketharin's sovereignty. "You will be perfect," Maresh assured him in careful Catharan. "Or at least convincingly adequate." Convincingly adequate was probably the best he could hope for. Calvera waited in the Grand Assembly Hall, surrounded by advisors who moved around her like satellites around an ice giant. She wore robes that cascaded in frozen waves, crowned with a circlet that seemed carved from a single massive crystal, and beneath it all, barely visible at the collar, Marcus saw the edge of his coat. Their eyes met across the chamber, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with protocol or politics. A shared acknowledgement, "We're doing this together." The first delegates arrived at precisely the appointed hour. A Vextari trade consortium in environmental suits that made them look like mobile gardens. A Quellan military delegation whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed against their organic tissue. Representatives from a dozen other species, each with their own customs and expectations and opinions about the humans standing behind the Catharan Empress. Marcus maintained perfect posture, perfect spacing, perfect neutral expression as Calvara greeted each delegation with the specific ceremonial requirements their cultures demanded. He watched her move through the complex social dance, navigating between traditions that sometimes directly contradicted each other, finding diplomatic solutions in real time while her body fought against temperatures that were comfortable for everyone else but taxing for her. 3 hours in, Marcus noticed the subtle signs, the slight tremor in her smaller limbs, the way her carapace darkened fractionally at the edges, the too careful placement of each step. She was declining, and no one else seemed to see it. He moved closer, closing the protocol-mandated distance by precisely half a step. close enough to intervene if needed, not so close as to violate formal spacing. Kelvera's posture shifted in what Marcus now recognized as gratitude. The Quellan ambassador approached, his mechanical parts whirring softly. "Empress Kelvera, I see you still maintain your human accessory." His translator rendered the words in neutral tones, but the implication was clear. "Royal Guard Marcus Chen serves with distinction," Kelvera replied evenly. "His presence honors both our peoples. Of course, though one wonders if distinction requires quite so much proximity. In Quellan culture, guards maintain defensive positions, not ceremonial ones. Agree and insult the Empress by suggesting she needed defending. Disagree and insult the ambassador by rejecting his cultural observation." But Kelvera moved first. In Catherine culture, those who save royal lives earn positions of trust. Royal Guard Chen demonstrated worthiness before he understood consequence. That is a form of distinction your culture might consider studying. The ambassador's mechanical eye whirred, refocusing. "A pointed observation, Your Majesty. I trust you can appreciate the difference." The Quellan delegation moved on, and Marcus caught the faintest shift in Kelvera's posture, satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. The exchange had cost her energy she couldn't spare. The ceremonies continued. Speeches delivered in 3 languages simultaneously. Traditional dances performed by Catharan artists whose movements defied human physics. Food offerings from 17 different species, most of which Marcus couldn't safely consume, and Kelvera ate in ceremonial portions despite her obvious discomfort. By hour 7, Marcus wasn't the only one noticing her decline. Advisor Vac appeared at her side, speaking too quietly for Marcus to hear. Kelvera's response was sharp enough to cut through the background noise. "I will endure. The ceremony concludes when the treaties are signed, not before." Marcus counted them like a countdown to crisis, watching Kelvera push through exhaustion that would have hospitalized a human. Her movements remained precise, her words diplomatically perfect, but Marcus saw what it cost her. Every gesture fighting against a body that was shutting down, every smile carved from ice-cold determination. The treaty signing began at hour 9. 17 delegations, each requiring specific ceremonial acknowledgement. Marcus watched Kelvera's hands shake as she affixed the Catharan seal to the final document, watched her straighten with visible effort as the last delegate expressed their satisfaction. And then, finally, the ceremonies concluded. The delegates departed to their quarters. The staff began dismantling decorations. The Grand Assembly Hall slowly emptied. Kelvera stood rigid in the center of the emptying space, and Marcus saw her fracturing in real time. Her carapace had darkened to a dangerous gray blue. Her limbs shook despite her attempts at control. Her breathing, the slight movements of respiratory plates along her torso, had become rapid and shallow. "Your Majesty," Advisor Vec began, reaching for her. She collapsed. Marcus moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the ice floor. Her body was frighteningly cold even through his gloves, her weight less than he expected, as though the frostmark consumed her from within. Guards surrounded them instantly, weapons drawn against a threat that was internal and unstoppable. "Medical bay," Marcus commanded, surprised by the authority in his own voice. "Now." They carried her through corridors that blurred together, Catharan physicians appearing from nowhere with equipment that hummed and beeped in frequencies that made Marcus's teeth ache. The medical bay was all crystalline surfaces and alien technology that looked more like art installation than life-saving equipment. Marcus laid Kelvera on the central platform as gently as possible and stepped back to let the physicians work. They moved with frightening efficiency, attaching monitors and injecting compounds and speaking in rapid medical terminology that his translator couldn't keep up with. Advisor Vec gripped Marcus's shoulder with surprising strength. "You caught her." In front of 17 delegations worth of witnesses, you caught an alien Empress and carried her to safety. Hadn't thought about anything except the person collapsing in front of him. She needed help. And you provided it again, without hesitation or regard for consequence. Vec's compound eyes reflected the medical bay's lights in fragmented patterns. "Do you understand what you've done? Saved her life. Demonstrated to the galaxy that the human who wears our ceremonial colors and stands behind our throne deserves both. You have made yourself unavoidably legitimate in a single moment." Vec released Marcus's shoulder. "The delegates who questioned your presence will now question their own judgment. Well done." Marcus didn't feel like he'd done anything well. He felt like he'd barely prevented another catastrophe, and only through luck and proximity. The lead physician approached, her limbs positioned in what Marcus recognized as cautious optimism. "She will survive. The hypothermia was severe but manageable. She will require 3 days of recovery minimum." "Can I—" Marcus started. "She asked for you," the physician interrupted. When we stabilized her, her first coherent words were, "Your name." You may see her briefly, but she needs rest more than conversation. Marcus entered the recovery chamber with the odd sensation that he'd been here before. Not physically, the medical bay was new territory, but emotionally. Standing beside Calvara while she fought battles he could barely comprehend. She lay on a specialized bed that regulated temperature with precision beyond human medicine, monitors displaying vital signs and colors and patterns that Marcus couldn't interpret. But she was conscious, and when she saw him, something like relief crossed her features. "You caught me," she said, her voice weaker than he'd ever heard it. "You fell." "I failed. You survived 9 hours of ceremony that would have killed you 3 months ago." Marcus moved closer, maintaining hospital-appropriate distance. "That's not failure, Calvara. That's winning a war one battle at a time." She managed a weak laugh. "The human teaches the Empress about endurance. The universe has a sense of humor. The human who you've been teaching about everything else for 3 months. I'm just returning the favor." Marcus glanced at the monitors, pretending he understood them. The physician said 3 days recovery. The Empire doesn't pause for weakness. Maybe it should. "When the debt bond ends, Marcus Chen, remind me to hire you as an advisor. You have no respect for protocols, and it's refreshing. When the debt bond ends, I'm going back to Earth and sleeping for a month." "Fair enough." She closed her eyes, and for a moment Marcus thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she spoke again, so quietly he almost missed it. "Thank you for catching me, for staying, for not hating me despite having every reason to." Marcus wanted to say he didn't hate her at all anymore, that somewhere in the past 3 months they'd crossed from captor and prisoner into something more complicated, but Calvara had already fallen asleep, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it could no longer fight. He left the medical bay and found the palace in chaos. News of the Empress's collapse had spread, and opinions fractured along predictable lines. Some saw it as weakness that proved she shouldn't rule, others as heroic endurance that demonstrated her worthiness, still others as political opportunity to advance various agendas. Narration found Marcus in the corridor looking even more tired than usual. "You need rest also. The servants' quarters are discussing nothing but your catch of the Empress. They're calling you Her Majesty's shield." "That's ridiculous. That's politics. You caught her, therefore you are her shield." Simple. Marcus let Maresh guide him back to his quarters, too exhausted to argue. He collapsed on the bed without undressing and stared at the crystalline ceiling until sleep finally dragged him under. He dreamed of falling through ice, of catching people who dissolved in his hands, of ceremonies that lasted forever while empresses froze in slow motion. He woke disoriented and found a message waiting on his datapad. From Calvara, "The debt remains." But perhaps it is becoming mutual. Marcus read it 3 times, trying to parse meaning from 5 words. Mutual debt. Mutual dependence. Mutual something that hadn't existed 3 months ago when he'd given away his coat. He pulled up his message history and scrolled through months of communications from Earth. His sister still angry and confused, his former commanding officer sending occasional updates about Corps gossip, a few friends who'd stopped writing after he failed to respond with adequate detail. His life had continued without him, adapting to his absence with the ease of water flowing around obstacles. The strange thing was that Marcus couldn't quite imagine going back to it anymore. The life of a royal guard in the diplomatic corps, standing at attention during tedious negotiations, following protocols designed for situations that rarely occurred. That life felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. This life learning alien cultures, standing beside an empress fighting her own biology, catching people who collapsed from invisible wars, felt more real than anything he'd done before, which was probably concerning. Stockholm Syndrome with extra steps. Trauma bonding across species lines. Whatever therapists would eventually call it, but in the moment, alone in chambers carved from ice on a planet light years from home, Marcus acknowledged something he'd been avoiding for weeks. He didn't want to leave anymore. Not because of the debt bond or legal requirements or political necessity, because somewhere in the past 3 months this had become his life. And Calvara had become someone he genuinely cared about protecting. The revelation should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first truly honest thought he'd had since arriving on Kithara Prime. Marcus stood and walked to the window, watching the alien sunrise paint the ice in colors that had no Earth names. 3 days until Calvara resumed duties, probably 2, knowing her stubborn refusal to show weakness. He'd be there when she did, not because of debt or duty or law, but because she needed someone who would catch her when she fell. And apparently, somewhere along the way, that had become enough. Calvera returned to duty in exactly 2 days, ignoring physician recommendations and advisor protests with equal efficiency. Marcus watched her resume control of the Empire as though she hadn't collapsed from hypothermia 48 hours earlier, her movements precise and her commands unwavering, if not for the medical monitors she'd been required to wear. Subtle patches on her carapace that tracked vital signs and fed data to worried physicians. No one would have known she'd been dying 3 days ago. "You should have rested longer," Marcus told her during a brief moment between meetings, abandoning protocol for blunt honesty. "I rested adequately. The Empire requires leadership, not an Empress wrapped in thermal blankets feeling sorry for herself." Calvera adjusted the collar of her robes, and Marcus saw his coat underneath again. She'd retrieved it from her chambers the moment she'd left medical bay. "Besides, I have Her Majesty's shield now. Apparently that's your official title, according to palace gossip." "I caught you once. That doesn't make me a shield." "You caught me twice. Landing platform and assembly hall. 2 and 3 months suggests a pattern." She moved toward the next diplomatic meeting, and Marcus fell into step behind her with the automatic precision of 3 months' training. "The staff have started the betting pool on how many times you'll catch me before the year ends." "That's horrifying. We cope with existential dread through statistical analysis." She paused before the meeting chamber doors. "The Quellan ambassador requested a private audience. Just him, me, and you." "That seems suspicious. Extremely. Which is why I want you there. If he attempts something inappropriate, respond as you see fit." The doors opened, and Calvara's posture shifted into formal diplomatic mode. "And try not to start an interstellar incident unless absolutely necessary." The Quellan ambassador waited in a private chamber designed for delicate negotiations, sound-dampening walls, no recording equipment, furniture arranged to suggest equality rather than hierarchy. His cybernetic enhancements gleamed under the bioluminescent lighting as he rose to greet them. "Empress Calvera, Royal Guard Chen, thank you for accommodating my request." He gestured to the seating. "Please, let us speak candidly." Marcus remained standing, positioning himself to intervene if needed while maintaining diplomatic distance. The ambassador's mechanical eye tracked him briefly before refocusing on Calvara. "The Quellan Collective has been observing your rule with great interest, Your Majesty, your resilience despite the Frostmark. Your refusal to show weakness even as it consumes you, your creative solutions to impossible problems." His mechanical parts whirred softly. "We admire determination in leaders. It mirrors our own philosophy of enhancement through adversity." Quote, "I appreciate the collective's observation," Calvara replied neutrally, "though I suspect admiration is not why you requested this meeting." "Excellent." The ambassador leaned forward slightly. "The collective wishes to offer you a solution to your condition. Our biotechnical division has developed enhancements that could regulate your thermal systems, eliminate the Frostmark entirely, and allow you to function without constant risk of hypothermia." Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop, though that was probably psychological. Calvera's posture remained perfectly controlled, revealing nothing. "In exchange for?" she asked. "Military access through Ketharan space. Trade concessions that favor Quellan interests, and a public endorsement of Quellan enhancement technology that would significantly boost our reputation across multiple systems." The ambassador's translator rendered his words in even, reasonable tones. "A small price for freedom from your biological prison." Silence stretched between them like ice across a frozen lake. Marcus watched Calvera process the offer, saw her consider the temptation of a life without the Frostmark balanced against the political cost of selling her sovereignty. "No," she said finally. The ambassador's cybernetic parts clicked in what might have been surprise. "Perhaps you misunderstand the offer."
We are talking about curing your condition entirely.
"No more collapses. No more risk. No more—" "I understand perfectly. And my answer remains no." Calvara stood, and despite her smaller size, she somehow dominated the room. "The Frostmark is part of who I am. It has shaped my rule, my decisions, my understanding of strength and limitation. To eliminate it would be to eliminate fundamental aspects of my leadership. You're choosing suffering over healing? I'm choosing authenticity over dependence. If I accept Quellan enhancement, I become forever bound to Quellan interests. Every decision I make will be questioned. Is this the Empress's choice or Quellan influence? Every policy will be suspect. Every alliance tainted. Her compound eyes caught the light in fragments. You offer me freedom from biology in exchange for political enslavement. That is not freedom, Ambassador. That is a cage with better amenities. The ambassador's mechanical eye refocused, analyzing. The collective anticipated this response. We have alternatives. The answer will remain no, regardless of alternatives presented. I thank the collective for their interest in my well-being, but the Catharan Empire is not for sale in any currency. Calvera moved toward the door and Marcus opened it with perfect timing. This meeting is concluded. They left the ambassador sitting in the negotiation chamber, his cybernetic parts whirring in agitation. Marcus followed Calvera through 3 corridors before she finally stopped, her carapace shifting through colors that indicated stress and determination. That was a test, she said quietly. The collective wanted to see if the Empress, who nearly died at her own anniversary celebration, was desperate enough to compromise Catharan sovereignty for personal comfort. They underestimated you. Some battles are worth fighting even when you know you'll never fully win them. She looked at Marcus directly. You understand that, don't you? You fight the debt bond not because you can defeat it, but because fighting defines who you are. Marcus considered denying it, then realized she was right. I stopped fighting it 3 weeks ago. Pavara stopped fighting it 3 weeks ago. When? I was choosing to help someone who needed it. Marcus shrugged. Turns out that changes everything. They stood in the corridor, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they'd crossed from forced association into genuine partnership without either of them quite noticing when. The debt bond may already be dissolving, Calvara said slowly. When the universe determines balance has been achieved, the bond simply ends. No ceremony, no announcement. It just releases. How would I know? Guards treating you as guest rather than bound servant. Freedom returning in increments until one day you realize you can simply leave if you choose to. Marcus tested the idea. Walking to the landing platform, boarding a transport, returning to Earth and his old life. The image felt hollow, like going backward instead of forward. What if I don't want to leave when the bond dissolves? Calvara's compound eyes reflected him in dozens of fragments, each showing a slightly different angle of the same truth. Then you would stay, not as bound servant, but as chosen ally. The distinction is everything. A chime interrupted them. Advisor Vec requesting immediate attendance in the strategic planning chamber. They proceeded together, and Marcus noticed the guards they passed no longer watched him with the careful suspicion of earlier months. Somewhere along the way, he'd been accepted as part of the palace's ecosystem. The strategic chamber revealed why Vec had called them urgently. Holographic displays showing military movements along the Catharan border, ships massing in patterns that suggested coordination and hostile intent. The Vecren Dominion, Vec explained. They've been probing our defenses for months. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major offensive. Calvara studied the displays with absolute focus. Motivation? Resource acquisition? Our ice synthesis technology? Access to our trade routes. Vec manipulated the holographics, showing supply lines and strategic positions. They believe the Frostmark makes you weak, that an empire led by a compromised Empress cannot mount effective resistance. They're wrong, Marcus said, surprising himself by speaking unbidden in a strategic meeting. Vec and Calvera both turned to him. They're wrong, Marcus repeated with more confidence. The Empress who endures 9 hours of ceremony while hypothermic, who rejects Quellen offers that would eliminate her suffering, who collapses and returns to duty in 2 days, that's not weakness. That's the most dangerous kind of strength, the kind that refuses to quit regardless of cost. Calvara's posture shifted through several emotions Marcus had learned to read. Surprise, consideration, determination. Royal Guard Chen makes an excellent point. The Vecrans have miscalculated. They see the Frostmark and assume fragility. They will learn otherwise. The strategic session continued for hours, planning defensive positions and alliance activations and military responses that Marcus only partially understood. But he understood enough. Cathara Prime was heading toward war, and the Empress they'd thought vulnerable would be leading from the front. When they finally concluded, Calvera dismissed everyone except Marcus. They stood alone in the strategic chamber, surrounded by holographic projections of potential battlefields. If war comes, you will be expected to accompany me to forward positions, Calvara said. The debt bond does not exclude you from combat. In fact, it specifically requires you to remain at my side during times of greatest danger. I understand. Do you? This isn't ceremony or protocol or diplomatic maneuvering. This is war, Marcus. People die in wars. Empresses die in wars. Her voice carried an edge he'd never heard before. Raw fear, carefully controlled. I cannot release you from the bond before conflict begins. The timing would be politically catastrophic. So you will follow me into battle because ancient laws demand it, and if we die bound together by a coat you gave away without thinking. Marcus moved closer, abandoning protocol entirely. Calvera, listen to me. I'm not staying because of the debt bond anymore. I'm staying because you need someone who will catch you when you fall, and I've gotten good at that. War or peace, ceremony or combat, I'm here because I choose to be. The bond stopped mattering weeks ago. She looked at him with those alien eyes that had become familiar, readable, expressive in ways his translator couldn't capture. You would fight for an empire that imprisoned you? I would fight for an empress who turned that imprisonment into partnership. There's a difference. Calvara's limbs moved through positions that Marcus had learned meant profound emotion carefully contained. When this is over, if we survive, remind me that humans are more complicated than our intelligence reports suggested. They stood in the strategic chamber as holographic battles played out around them. Two people from different species preparing for war they hadn't wanted, but would face together. The debt bond that had brought them to this moment felt less like chains and more like the foundation of something neither of them fully understood yet. But they would, in time. If they survived. And Marcus Chen, who had given away his coat to a freezing stranger and accidentally bound himself to an alien empire, discovered that he very much wanted to survive, not to escape, not to return to his old life. But to see where this impossible partnership would lead when they weren't fighting for survival every moment. The war came 3 weeks later, sudden and brutal as winter storms. Vecran warships breached Catharan space in coordinated strikes, targeting resource stations and trade hubs with precision that spoke of months of intelligence gathering. Calvara mobilized the Empire's defense forces from a command ship that looked like a frozen cathedral given engines, and Marcus stood beside her as plasma fire lit up the viewports in colors that would haunt his dreams. Status, Calvara commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority despite the ship shaking from nearby impacts. The tactical officer rattled off positions and casualty estimates in rapid Catharan that Marcus's translator struggled to keep pace with. The summary was grim. 3 stations destroyed, 2 more heavily damaged, Vecran forces pushing deeper into controlled space with each passing hour. Deploy the 7th Fleet to defensive position Theta 9. Redirect the 11th to protect the civilian evacuation corridors. And prepare my shuttle. I'm going to the forward command station. Calvara's orders flowed with practiced precision, each decision made instantly and communicated with clarity that left no room for confusion. Advisor Vec materialized beside her, his armor suggesting he'd come directly from coordinating ground defenses. Your Majesty, the forward station is under direct fire. Sending you there is... The commanders need to see their Empress standing with them, not hiding behind defensive lines while they die protecting my empire. She turned to Marcus. Royal Guard Chen, you are released from duty for the duration of this operation. What I'm about to do is beyond the requirements of the debt bond. You may remain on this command ship in safety. Marcus understood what she was offering. A way out without dishonor, a chance to survive while she flew into the most dangerous position in the theater. A release from the bond she couldn't officially grant, but could facilitate through circumstance. With respect, Your Majesty, shut up and let's get to that shuttle. Marcus checked his sidearm, the Catharan weapon he'd been trained to use for exactly this scenario. You're not doing this alone. Calvara's posture shifted through surprise, gratitude, and what might have been affection too complex for Marcus's translator. You are aware this decision is tactically unsound? I'm aware you're about to do something incredibly dangerous, and you'll be at higher risk of hypothermic collapse under combat stress, which means you need someone watching who knows the signs. Marcus moved toward the shuttle bay. Besides, I've gotten attached to being your shield. Might as well make it official. They took the shuttle with a minimal security team. 4 elite guards whose armor suggested they'd volunteered rather than been ordered. The flight to the forward command station took 12 minutes of dodging debris fields and weapons fire, the pilot navigating with skill that made Marcus grateful he'd skipped breakfast. The station was chaos-given structure, weapon systems firing in coordinated patterns, shield generators humming at maximum capacity, personnel moving with efficient urgency between stations while explosions colored the viewports. And at the center of it all, a Catharan admiral whose carapace bore the scars of previous wars. Admiral Krishnal turned as Calvara entered the command deck, and his posture shifted through shock and instant respect. "Your Majesty, you should not be here. And yet I am. Report." Kreshnel brought up tactical displays showing the battle in overwhelming detail. Vecran ships outnumbered Catharan forces 3-2, their coordination suggesting a single controlling intelligence rather than individual commanders. They were pushing toward the capital system, clearly intending to strike at Kethra Prime itself. "We can hold this position for approximately 4 more hours before shields fail," Kreshnel stated. "After that, we'll need to fall back to secondary defensive lines. Unacceptable. If we fall back, they take control of the Vect transit corridor. Half our trade routes become unusable." Kelvera studied the displays with absolute focus. "What assets do we have that they don't know about? Your Majesty? Every military has reserve forces, secret weapons. Experimental technology that hasn't been deployed because the political cost was too high or the risk too great." She turned to face the Admiral directly. "What do we have that could change this battle if we were desperate enough to use it?" Kreshnel's limbs moved through positions that suggested profound discomfort. "There is Project Stillness, an experimental weapon system that generates localized temperature reduction fields, effectively flash freezes any ships caught in its radius, regardless of shielding." Marcus saw where this was going. "And the cost?" "It requires massive power expenditure. Using it would drain shields on this entire station, leaving us vulnerable for approximately 90 seconds. The Admiral's posture screamed opposition to the idea. "It's a weapon of last resort, Your Majesty. If it fails, we lose everything." Kelvara studied the tactical displays, and Marcus watched her process probabilities and costs and consequences. Outside the viewports, Vecran ships pressed closer, their weapons fire eating away at the station's shields increment by increment. "We use it," she decided. "Target their command cluster. If we can eliminate their central coordination, the remaining ships will scatter into individual units we can handle separately." "Your Majesty, that's an order, Admiral. Prepare Project Stillness for deployment. All personnel to defensive stations, and pray that experimental technology functions as designed rather than as feared." The station transformed around them as Kreshnal's orders echoed through the command structure. Personnel sealed emergency hatches and secured equipment while the weapon system powered up with a sound like grinding glaciers. Marcus positioned himself beside Kelvera, close enough to catch her if the stress triggered a collapse, far enough to give her space to command. 90 seconds without shields," she said quietly, as though speaking to herself. 90 seconds where a single direct hit destroys this station and everyone on it. 90 seconds where I gamble thousands of lives on experimental technology. 90 seconds where you do what Empresses do. Make impossible choices and live with the consequences," Marcus replied. "You've been doing that since I met you." "This is war. This is—" "Project Stillness is ready to fire," Kreshnel announced. "Awaiting your command, Your Majesty." Kelvera straightened, and despite the frost mark and the stress and the weight of thousands of lives in her decision, she radiated absolute authority. Fire. Through the viewports, space itself seemed to ripple as temperature plummeted in a sphere expanding at relativistic speeds. The Vecran command cluster, 7 warships coordinating the entire assault, froze. Not metaphorically, literally. Ice formed across their hulls in seconds, spreading from point of contact through entire ship structures. Their shields collapsed. Their engines died, their weapons went silent. 7 warships transformed into frozen monuments in the span of heartbeats, and the station's shields dropped to 0. "Incoming fire!" Tactical shouted. "Multiple vectors, 90-1 seconds until..." "Burn through those frozen ships, create a debris field they have to navigate around, buy us time." The station's weapons opened up on the frozen Vecran vessels, and Marcus watched 7 warships shatter under concentrated fire like ice sculptures under hammers. Debris scattered in expanding clouds, creating obstacles that forced the remaining Vecran ships to adjust their approaches, slow their advance, choose paths that added precious seconds to their attack runs. Shields at 20%, engineering reported. 40%, 60%. The Vecran forces pressed forward, but without central coordination, their formation dissolved into individual attacks that Catharan defenders could counter piecemeal. Marcus watched the battle shift in real time, from imminent defeat to desperate holding action, to grinding stalemate, to finally, Vecran retreat. "They're withdrawing," Tactical confirmed, voice shaking with relief and disbelief in equal measure. "All remaining Vecran vessels breaking contact and leaving Catharan space." Personnel embraced or performed Catherine gestures of victory or simply sagged in their stations, adrenaline draining into exhaustion. Kelvara remained standing, watching the Vecron ships disappear into faster-than-light transit, her posture revealing nothing. Then she collapsed. Marcus caught her before she hit the deck, his arms familiar with her weight by now. Her carapace had gone completely gray-blue. Her body temperature dropped to dangerous levels from the combination of combat stress and the experimental weapons temperature effects. "Medical team to command deck," Marcus shouted, already carrying Kelvara toward the medical bay. "Empress down, hypothermic collapse." The medical team met him halfway, their equipment deployed before even later on the treatment platform. They worked with urgent efficiency, warming protocols and medication and monitoring systems that beeped in patterns Marcus had learned to interpret as critical but stable. Admiral Kreshnal appeared in the medical bay entrance. "The Empress?" "Will survive," the lead physician reported, "but she requires immediate transport to the palace medical facilities. The station lacks the specialized equipment for frostmark treatment." They loaded Kelvara onto a medical shuttle, and Marcus stayed beside her as they flew back to the palace through space still glittering with battle debris. Her eyes opened briefly during transit, unfocused but aware. "Did we win?" she whispered. "You won. Project Stillness worked exactly as hoped." The Vecrans retreated. Marcus kept his voice level despite the fear still coursing through him. "You gambled everything and won, Kelvara, just like you always do. Sometimes I fall. And I catch you. That's how this works now, Her Majesty's shield. The staff were right about you." Then she lost consciousness again, and Marcus spent the rest of the flight monitoring her vital signs on displays he still didn't fully understand, but had learned to read through repetition and necessity. The palace medical team stabilized her within hours, their specialized equipment and protocols designed specifically for frostmark treatment working with visible efficiency. But the physicians were clear. Full recovery would take weeks, not days. The combination of combat stress and extreme hypothermia had pushed her biological systems to their absolute limits. Marcus stayed in the medical bay for 3 days straight, sleeping in a chair beside her bed and eating whatever Maresh brought him at irregular intervals. Advisor Vec appeared periodically with updates. The Vecrons had formally requested ceasefire negotiations. The Catharan military had achieved complete tactical victory. The Empire was celebrating an Empress who had won a war from the forward command position while fighting her own biology. On the 4th day, Kelvara finally woke properly, her compound eyes focused and alert. "You look terrible," she observed. Marcus glanced at his reflection in a nearby monitor. "Unshaven, disheveled, exhausted. You've been unconscious for 4 days. I've been worried." The physicians assured everyone I would survive, because worry doesn't respond to logical reassurance. Marcus stood and stretched, his muscles protesting the days in an uncomfortable chair. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't try to return to duty immediately like you did last time." "I can't. The physicians threatened to sedate me if I attempted it." Kelvara shifted slightly on the bed, and Marcus saw her wince. The debt bond. I can feel it changing. Changing how? Dissolving. The universe has determined balance is achieved. You saved my life on the landing platform. Caught me at the anniversary celebration. Followed me into combat when you could have claimed release. Stayed beside me for 4 days while I recovered. Her voice carried something between gratitude and grief. The debt is fulfilled, Marcus. You're free. Marcus tested the truth of it, reaching inward for the subtle pressure that had defined his existence for months. The sense of being bound, constrained, required to stay. It was gone. He could walk out of the medical bay, board a transport, return to Earth, and nothing would stop him. The realization should have felt like liberation. Instead, it felt like standing at a crossroads without a map. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you choose. Stay as free ally, or leave to resume your previous life. The choice is entirely yours." Kelvara's compound eyes reflected him in familiar fragments. "I cannot command you. I cannot bind you. I can only ask, knowing you have every right to refuse. Would you consider remaining on Cathar Prime? Not as bound servant, but as advisor, guard, and..." She paused, searching for words. "Friend?" His sister. His old duties. The life that had continued without him and would welcome him back if he returned. Then he thought about Kelvara. Brilliant and broken and stubborn in equal measure. An Empress fighting wars on multiple fronts while her own body tried to kill her. Someone who had turned imprisonment into partnership and binding, into genuine connection. The choice wasn't difficult at all. I'll stay. Not because of debt or duty or law, Because you're right, we've become friends somewhere along the way, and friends don't abandon each other when things get complicated. Marcus smiled, surprising himself. Besides, someone needs to keep catching you when you fall. Might as well be the human who gave you his coat. Kelvera's posture shifted to relief and joy in something deeper that transcended translation. Then welcome to Cathara Prime, Marcus Chen. Not as prisoner or bound servant, but as chosen ally of the Empire and personal friend to an Empress who really needs to stop nearly dying quite so frequently. Agree. They spent the next 2 weeks in recovery and reconstruction. Kelvara healing from hypothermic collapse, Marcus processing the fundamental shift from bound to free, the Empire celebrating a military victory that had cost far less than anyone expected. The Vecrans sued for peace with terms favorable to Cathara, their miscalculation about Empress weakness now a cautionary tale in tactical academies across 3 systems. When Kelvara finally returned to full duty, Marcus stood beside her not because law demanded it, but because partnership required it. The staff noticed the change immediately, their treatment of him transforming from careful respect to genuine acceptance. Mirage delivered his meals with additional commentary about palace gossip. The guards greeted him by name. Advisor Veek started requesting his input in strategic sessions, and Kelvara still wore his coat under her formal robes, a visible symbol of the moment everything changed. "You know you can keep that permanently, right?" Marcus mentioned one evening in the observation gallery, their private space for conversations that mattered. "It's been months. That coat is more yours than mine at this point." "I know, but someday you might want it back. When you finally leave for Earth or decide this partnership has run its course, or simply grow tired of catching collapsing empresses." She touched the coat's collar, a gesture that had become habitual. "On that day, I want to be able to return what you gave me. What if that day never comes? Then I suppose I'll wear your coat forever, and you'll stay here catching me when I fall, and the universe will continue its bizarre sense of humor about humans and empresses and coats given without thought of consequence." Marcus laughed, and the sound echoed through the crystalline chamber. "Sounds about right." They stood together in the observation gallery, watching alien stars wheel overhead, 2 people from different species who had found partnership in the most unlikely circumstances. The debt bond had dissolved, but what replaced it was stronger precisely because it was chosen rather than imposed. Marcus Chen had given away his coat to save a freezing stranger, and somehow that single act of basic decency had restructured his entire existence, created alliances across species, prevented a war from becoming catastrophic, and bound him to an empress who turned imprisonment into friendship. And as he stood beside Kelvara in their favorite space in the palace, Marcus discovered he wouldn't change a single moment of it. Even the parts where he nearly froze to death or got caught in space battles or watched someone he cared about collapse from their own biology, because those moments led here, to partnership, to purpose, to standing beside someone who needed him as much as he'd apparently needed this, Her Majesty's shield. Marcus had earned the title without trying, and somewhere along the way, it had become not just accurate but true. The Empire spread below them, frozen and beautiful and worth protecting. And Marcus Chen, formerly imprisoned royal guard, now freely chose an ally and friend, prepared to spend the foreseeable future making sure one stubborn empress survived long enough to see her empire thrive. One coat, one choice. Everything that followed was consequence. And Marcus was finally genuinely at peace with that.